Welcome to the IDP Hunters Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hungarter. As you guys know, I'm a writer over at the Fancy Six Pack. I'm also a writer over at IDP Plus. I'm also on Fancy Pros. I am the number 4 ECR ranker, as well as I host this podcast. Tonight, we're going to go over offense and defense. We're going to go over the NFC South. But I'm not going to do it alone. Tonight, I bring in my friend, Chew Russell. Chew Russell is, he's over there at the he goes by Father Dynasty on Twitter, but he also rocks the Father Dynasty podcast. He's also a article writer over at the Going for Two. And Chew also does the rookie profiles over at the Fancy Assessment for Going for Two. What's going on, Chew?
What's up, man? Thank you for having me, and really excited to talk the most dreary of divisions in the NFL.
Ain't that the truth, man? When you look at this division, it's horrible for offense. Historically, you have bad offenses, you have quarterback carousels, you got a lot going on. But you know what? That's great news for me in IDP. Great news. We're going to see some turnovers, some guys that are stats. That's one thing instantly that jumps out to me with the NFC South.
Yeah, I would say with that's the sad thing that it's you get each team playing the division twice, and honestly, it's so close. Despite my hometown Panthers right here only getting 2 wins last year, you still never know. I know division matchups in any division in the NFL can be a toss up, but I feel like specifically in the South, you really don't know how it's going to shake out week to week.
Ain't that truth? And then I would say, if we could appreciate and take a moment just how remarkably close this division has been. You have the Saints winning 7 division titles, the Bucs winning 6, the Panthers winning 5, and the Falcons winning 4. And not to mention, within those runs, they all have Super Bowl runs in there. Mm-hmm. I remember the Panthers had that great run 2013 to 2015. And then, when Drew Brees came up, he was running this division for quite a few years. And then in Tampa Bay broke that. So what I think the Saints were like 4 years in a row, and Tampa Bay came in there and ended up winning 3 consecutive back-to-back, as opposed to last year. I was shocked, actually, that they won it last year. But point being, to your point, this division is usually wide open.
You want to know what the funny thing is, too, about Tampa Bay? So, interesting little stat. Once in 2020, when the NFL switched to the 17-game season, Tampa Bay, they, of course, won back-to-back, and they're the only team since switching to 17 games to win their division in back-to-back years without getting double-digit wins. They had 8 non-wins in each season. So I know people get furious whenever you have that division winner that's not even getting like 10 wins.
Yeah.
That's that team.
Oh my goodness. There you go. Yeah, they're just doing enough to get by, right? I honestly did not suspect. I was thinking the Saints were going to pull it out last year. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Tampa Bay, there they go. They go in there, pulling it out again. I think we should start here if you want to talk Tampa Bay. Let me give you some stats. For the audience that's on Spotify and can't see the screen, the audience on YouTube will see what me and Chew are doing. I kind of pulled up PFF. We kind of have the penciled in starters right now. And I'm kind of going to read some stats to you guys. For Tampa Bay, their total offense was ranked 23rd. They averaged 313 yards. Rushing, they were 32nd. I was surprised by that when I heard that, but 88.8. Passing, they were 17th, 224.2. Total defense was 23rd, 344.2. Passing defense was 5th, 95.3. No, I'm sorry. That was defensive rushing. Sorry. The passing defense was 29th. Big difference. So against the run, they're 5th. Against the pass, they're 29th, giving up 248.9. But when I look at all those stats together, that doesn't really seem like a division champion,
Yeah, that was the big shock to me. Thinking about some of the stats, thinking about what I remember from the Buccaneers, at least from what I had seen, of course, them being a division opponent of the Panthers. I feel like it was a tale of 2 halves when it came to that season. I mean, Dave Canales, of course, he's the ex-offensive coordinator now. He's the head coach of the Panthers. He's been, asked tremendously about, what he's done with all of his quarterbacks in his career. What did he do, last year with the Buccaneers? And, one thing that he had mentioned talking about really sticking with the run was, Rachaad White was, for the first real half of the season, was not efficient at all, but Canales stuck with it. And I feel like towards the second half, over the course of the season, I'm sure it wasn't a tremendous offense, but I really think they kind of flipped a switch, and I feel like the consistency of sticking with the run helped Baker to really stick with getting it over the top to the Mike Evans, who had a tremendous season.
This team shocked me. And Mike Evans, you just nailed it. Mike Evans, Baker came out of nowhere. I mean, they finished 9-8. They made the playoffs. They lose the division round to the Detroit Lions. They overachieved everywhere. And it was interesting to me because I honestly counted them out, despite having a $7 million dead space post Tom Brady era, right? Mm-hmm. All the experts counted them out for the most part, but they won 5 of the last 6. So they were trending upwards while the Saints were trending downwards, even though they both had the same record, But I think that was the major difference. Interesting enough, Chew, I wrote this article last year, and the biggest need they had last year was defensive line. They cleaned that up. They got some quality defensive linemen in the draft last year. And I'm wondering this year, I'm looking at their team needs. Let me just run at you. This is what I thought they were. You tell me. I put offensive line. I put defensive line because they can always use more players, and I put linebacker. What says you when you look at Tampa Bay as far as team needs?
Honestly, those are the 3 that jumped out, and you could maybe say cornerback. I think if you're really stretching it, of like at some point if you have a player of value in those first couple of rounds, then go for it. But I think certainly with the first 2, maybe even to the 3 rounds, I don't think you want to let the edge rushers and the linebackers slip too far. And with the offensive line, certainly on the interior, I think they could use some help. But in seeing what they've got, the first, the second rounder, they have 2 third rounders, which I think could be helpful for them. If they're not getting who they need necessarily in the first or second, you could get someone that falls to the third, or they could pair those thirds to be able to bump back up to the second, get somebody that slips. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now on PFF. When I look at the offensive line, I feel like left guard and center could be retooled a little bit. Not that it's you could be had. If there was one position last year, what's his name? I can't pronounce his Breedson. Left guard, he was rated at 42.1. The center was rated at 50.2. The guard was rated 43.9, but the tackles look really good here. There was one position to own the Bucs. I'd say it was interior. And then when I went over here to defensive line, Cansey was a great ad. Via's always been a solid guy in IDP, which we'll break that down, But and then Yaya was great pickup. I think depth. If I was to say one thing, they could probably use more depth. And then linebacker, I'm not quite sure the plan there. I think it was smart to get rid of Devin White because we've shown the decline there. But I think if they get one more guy inside, outside to figure this thing out, I'm going to come back and revisit that because I think depth is an issue here too. But it should be interesting in the preseason seeing all these camp battles.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. When you look at just the starting lineup, and if you don't see a tremendous number of holes in it, specifically in the defense, they were fortunate to bring back a good number of people outside of White. But while that is good for continuity and everything, and the defensive coaching staff, as far as I know, is still all in place, you really do want to make sure that you are building through the draft to where you have these guys that are coming in. If they aren't filling a need at that moment, they're filling depth that you never don't have the need next year when you have someone leave or someone age out. So
when you look at this offense, particularly the quarterback, and I sense like they're going to need to retool soon because you said Mike Evans, he's longer in the tooth. A lot of these guys are older. What do you see? Anything glare out to you? And do you think Baker is a long-term answer?
I was not too sure before last season. I figured at a minimum he would be a very good bridge. And going into the season, or in the first couple of weeks, I think you could tell, no one wanted to jump out and be like, oh, he is the guy. Like, we've seen him play at a number of different places at this point. We wanted to see him play a full season and see what that looks like. And I think he's the guy. I think, he's not too old. I want to say he's 30. So I think he's kind of settling into his own. I think he's in a good system right now. He's got good weapons. They are a bit older, but I think Evans 30, 31, Godwin 28, around that age. So it couldn't hurt. I know Trey Palmer was a good ad there, but I do think they need to probably add another wide receiver within the first, say, 4 rounds or so if they can get a good value there. It's not an immediate need, but I don't think you want to wait too long on that considering how deep this wide receiver class is. And a big boost for them. Rachaad White was someone who I was not as high on as most coming into last season, and like I'd mentioned about them not starting out too strong on the rushing attack. He finished strong. He can do it all. He's a big back, and I really think when you have Baker back there slinging it, getting more comfortable, I think having a sturdy back who can do everything like Rachaad White, I think you're pretty settled there, and maybe just kind of invest in some wide receivers for some depth.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan as well. Let's look at the defensive side of the ball real quick here. So I'm looking at the defensive side, and like I said, another good draft would really help this team out. That's probably the case for every team, but no, seriously though, they did really well last year. The two defensive guys they brought in. Well, let's go over to defensive line. Kalijah Cansey had 4 sacks, right? He was a top draft prospect. He was often compared to Aaron Rodgers if we go back to last year's rookie draft. Cansey, and put him with the other rookie, I can't pronounce it, Diaby, however you say his name. Diaby actually had 7.5 sacks. Those were both premier rookies. And if, Cansey didn't slow down and get hurt, he probably would have been higher. But those two stole the show, and they really helped this team restock the depth chart with those 2 players. I think they need another piece just to keep that going. One player they do have that's been there a while, Vita Vea. He's a sneaky guy to have in like deeper IDP leagues, because one thing about Vita, well, 2 things. He gets a lot of pressures. He gets a lot of double teams, and he also logs a lot of snaps. Last year, I routinely talked about him as a waiver wire pickup. He got 607 snaps last year, produced 5.5 sacks. And the numbers should speak for himself. In real life, he gets double teamed. He's in the trenches. He's fighting. He's making everyone else better around him. The 4th player, this is where we start to get a little bit trickled down here. It's a little bit watered down, I guess. Logan Hall, he's another top pick. We'd have to go back all the way to the 2022 draft. He's experienced. He's a bit challenging to own. I don't recommend owning him, but the first couple seasons it's been frustrating to figure him out. But to be honest, I mean, he started all 13 games. He's nearly doubled his total tackles from 12 the season before to 22. He doesn't provide much in the sack department, just 3 sacks, but he gets it done for 2 seasons. I look elsewhere, but deeper leagues, players start. He's a plug-in hole for now. But again, you have 3 other guys that are getting it done. You can get by with a Logan Hall for the time being, but I do think that if there's one place to excel, get yourself some depth at that position. Those are only 4 guys I'm really looking at right there.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on Levante David? I think they brought him back. Was it just on a 1-year deal, I want to say? I know he's a bit older, but.
Yeah, Levante David, a lot of people were like, oh, did you see the breakout year he had last year? Honestly, no. The truth here is he's been doing this his entire career. He really has. He's one of the better linebackers that doesn't get any attention. I can't honestly tell you why. I don't understand it, but he does put up these great elite-esque numbers. I'll just tell you real quick, Chew, his career stats, because I have it right here: 1,480 tackles, 33.5 sacks, 28 forced fumbles, 18 fumble recoveries, 12 interceptions. No one wants to talk about pass deflections for a linebacker. I will. 64 pass deflections, 3 touchdowns. I mean, it's not picture perfect. Devin White was the one getting all the attention. I don't know what happened to Devin White. But maybe it was his foot, maybe it was an injury, maybe he's just getting old. I think it's a good deal that they moved away from him. Levante David's a bit older in the tooth, but I'm expecting the same volume we've been getting out of him. I'm actually, if I may, I'm going to talk about the linebackers with you here. David, I'm pretty proud of. The other guy I'm proud of here, there's a guy named KJ Britt. A lot of people don't know, but he was the Bucs' best tackler last year. He had over 100 snaps. His run grade on PFF was 72. That was slightly behind David, who was ranked at 75. You see my point there? Yeah. The difference between Britt and David, Britt's missed tackle rate is less. He had an amazing 3.8. By comparison, Devin White's was 8.3. That's why he probably hit the road, Jack, right? Because KJ Britt was doing it. There's a younger guy in this linebacker core I'm kind of interested in. We're waiting to see. The name is Servoisier Dennis. We're waiting to see if he can carve out a role next year. Dennis was a 5th-round pick last year in most IDP players. He's mostly on my taxi squads in bigger leagues. But I can see him filling a role. I can see him getting ahead of guys like Anthony Nelson, J.J. Russell, who are looking to sub in. But I can see that happening. I love this linebacker core. I'll tell you a guy who I'm not interested in. And this may be your defensive lineman piece. This may be your linebacker piece. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. His name is Joe Tyon Shoyonka. I don't even know if I'm saying it right. Joe Tyon Shoyonka. He plays DL linebacker. He was another player that was highly regarded, a really good off-ball linebacker. He was supposed to be the guy. Combine, he had 4.6 speed. He was supposed to come in and replace Pierre-Paul. Then he was supposed to replace Shaq Barrett. None of that stuff happened. Todd Boyle seemed to kind of unlock him a bit. They play him as a joker. So a joker linebacker, which is sometimes he'll be move around, they'll shift. They play him in like a hybrid kind of joker role. So leave it to Bowles to kind of figure out a way to use him. But, you know, he typically gets benched from time to time, but IDP managers know this guy. I'd consider trading him while people still think he's a name, while he has relevance. But he's a depth piece. He's a bench piece. I really like the defensive linebackers and the linebackers moving forward. But I think if we can move on from Joe here, and maybe if Dennis steps up, we can see that run defense go from 5th and maybe to be even a top tier, like 4-3. I can see it 2, maybe not 1. But they can clean that up a lot. They do really good in the rush. The pass is where this team kind of gets stuck a little bit. What says you, before I do defensive backs, is there anything on the offensive side you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that kind of sticks out to me with this team, and I touched on it just for a second there, but the pass catchers that they have as a whole, between wide receiver and the tight end as well. Cade Otton, I think, is a little bit underappreciated. I think from a fantasy perspective, I think we really focus on those top guys. And I think once you get outside of those top 4 or 5, maybe 6, the fantasy impact, I think it's just a tremendous tier of just these other guys that will just get us by. And I think Cade Otton is one of those guys who is kind of on that tier that, while they do have the continuity of keeping Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I don't know. While I like Trey Palmer out of the slot, I don't know that he's going to, end up getting enough volume. And I think Cade Otton, as his offense improves, as we're talking with the draft, if they do beef up that interior line, and they're able to kind of blend the rush and the pass together, I think Cade Otton's going to get more chances possibly in the red zone, get more touchdowns. I think that's going to kind of boost his value. And talking again about the wide receivers, they brought back Evans, and I think the biggest thing is Evans finishing. I wanted to say he was 10th in points per game last year, and he's one of those guys where we're just waiting for it to fall off. We're waiting for, his game has never been built on speed, but every single year he can dominate on the perimeter. You put him in man coverage, he is going to win. It doesn't matter if it's in the red zone, doesn't matter if it's in the open field. He consistently does it. And we've all seen it. If anyone's ever had Mike Evans, when you see him have drop almost a goose egg and then have the multi-touchdown, over 100-yard, whatever game, and you're furious that you may or may not have played him depending on the size of your league. But he's one of those guys where I see him in the same light as I'd see like a Keenan Allen. I don't care how old he is. I'm going to play him until he retires. So
I was thinking that when you were talking about Mike Evans, I'm like, every year I hear it. Everybody talks about getting off this guy. Every year. This is like the 3rd or 4th year, and all he does is produce.
Yep.
Every year. I guess move back to defensive backs, right? So what I would tell you about the defensive backs, okay, they're not maybe a good statistical unit, finishing, 29th in the league, but they're really good at IDP. Of course, a guy catches the ball on me, I'm going to make a tackle, right? They produce a lot of turnovers. They produce a lot of tackle production. Antoine Winfield Jr. is the name to know. Let's start here. He was the number 1 DB overall, most scoring formats. He had 122 tackles and 6 sacks. 3 interceptions are just a bonus. That's the cherry on the sundae, right? So keep expecting that in this format. He's actually a free safety, but he plays more like a strong safety moving around the field. He's paired up with a guy named Jordan Whitehead. Now, for Tampa Bay fans, that should sound familiar because it's kind of a fun story. He formerly played with this team on their Super Bowl run in 2022. So it's kind of a leadership move. It's kind of a locker room presence. Whitehead actually had a couple games last year, famously with the Jets when the Bills game when he picked off Josh Allen 3 times. I think that was week 1, something like that. But anyway, he started 55 games for this team from 2018 to 2021. So I feel like there's a role there. Going down the chart a little bit more, we got guys like Jamal Dean. He didn't have a great season to the untrained eye, but sometimes you got to look beyond the stats. He actually fared pretty well. PFF had him pretty ranked high. As far as the metrics tells a different story. His coverage was 75.1. Passer ratings went down when targeted at him. In fact, it was the 13th lowest out of all starting corners. So the guy's not necessarily bad. Just because he doesn't have the stats, that probably what that tells me, real life football, they move away from him and they target other players. The other position may be a strength and maybe a weakness, depending on how you look at this. There's a guy named Zion McCollum. He had 41 tackles last year. I'm expecting him to step up and possibly lock down this job, but he's going to be pushed by a couple other players. There's a couple other players in this roster that may do something. I like Zion. PFF has him high too. He can play inside, play outside. He amassed 59 snaps as a slot corner last year, 665 on the outside, and he got 31 as a safety. I was shocked by that. They actually moved him to safety. It's probably because they move around Winfield all the time. So I believe that player's on the rise if you're playing in cornerback-favored leagues. There's another guy. He's an undrafted rookie, Christian Eisen. He made waves. I think he snagged 2 interceptions the first 2 games of the year. Then he kind of faded away, but he had 719 snaps last year. I think he's getting the nickel role. There's another rookie as far as depth goes. His name's Josh Hayes. He primarily worked on special teams. I don't see him carving a role too much. But in summation, that's your defensive backs. Question for you, Chu. How do you see this team finishing out?
So looking at what we'll talk about them in a second. Looking at what the Falcons did, I don't know that the Bucs can overtake the Falcons. I'm really trying to not be a prisoner of the moment when it comes to the Falcons got the shiny new toy in Kirk Cousins. That'll unlock the rest of the offense, and that will elevate them to the first in the division. That may or may not happen, but now the Bucs have a legitimate threat to being overtaken in this division. And again, continuity is key, in my opinion, when it comes to offense. I know they did, of course, lose their offensive coordinator and a couple of position coaches as well. But in terms of players, they kept a lot. I think they can build through the draft a little bit. And, I think at worst they're going to be second in this division. I don't think the Panthers certainly are not going to be challenging them. And again, I think the Panthers and the Saints are actually going to be battling for the caboose of this division, unfortunately, with the Saints cap situation and generally just how this team has been more or less mismanaged ever since Drew Brees left.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was too with the Saints too, because I think it's the Saints Buccaneers division again. But you have the Falcons screaming at the door. Let's go over to the Saints. Let's do that one. That seems like an interesting team. Again, going from Carr to Brees seems like a huge letdown, right? Am I being critical of that guy? I'm not quite sure. Let's pull some numbers here up on the Saints, though. So when we look at the Saints, where are they at there? Okay, yeah, when we look at the Saints, defense kind of led the way. You got total defense 327.2. That was ranked 13th. Rushing defense was 119.9. Rushing defense was 22nd. And I'm going to tell you in a couple minutes, when I was watching games, those guys are older in the tooth. You can tell they were kind of gassed at the end of games. Passing defense was 207.3. That was ranked 10th. So they weren't bad against the run. Let me look at the offense. The offense was 14th, middle of the pack, 337.2. Rushing, surprisingly, was 21st, 102.5. Passing, okay, you were 234.7. That was ranked 11th. So I guess the answer we're looking for, kind of middling, right? To the untrained eye, they finished 9-8. They tied for first place. Some people would say that's a successful season. In my mind, it's not. This team was supposed to be the superior team. I don't know, man. Since the post, and you said it earlier, since the post Sean Payton, Drew Brees era, I feel like this team has underperformed. What are your thoughts on the Saints?
The Saints, like you were talking about at the beginning, talking about a lot of the runs of the different teams in the division. The Saints had that period where I think it was 4 years straight that they were winning the division, and it feels like it was so long ago looking at this team. I know once they had gotten Carr, I think there was a lot of hesitation in terms of what that meant for the team. Was that what's going to help Olave grow? At the time, Michael Thomas was still on the team. He, of course, is not anymore. And it really just hasn't happened. I feel like back when you think about the Sean Payton era, you think about how he used Taysom Hill, which does still happen a bit to this point. But I think the allure of that's kind of taken away a bit. Overall, really, I think you just hope that Carr can get back to his former glory of when he was with the Raiders. It's watching some of the games with Carr, the level of frustration and everything that he had throughout. Not that he looked lost. It just seemed like he was kind of losing control a bit of this team, this offense.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was them not believing in him not being on the same page. But, I mean, again, it's a lot of similar pieces from last year. So I really hope they figured it out this offseason.
So let me ask you this. As far as team needs goes, I put 3 here. I just want to pick your brain. I put quarterback as a team need. Do you, in your opinion, do you like Carr? I don't see him as a replacement. I really don't. But do you think Carr's a steady quarterback? Do you think quarterback's a team need for these guys?
I think as a luxury need, I would say yes. If they maybe had the picks and had the ability to do that, I feel like it would be possibly best for them if it's kind of working on, let's beef up this O-line, probably the interior defensive line.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
I think those are the two. I was like, if you can do that, if you can focus on that, see how Carr plays this year, I think at a minimum he will be serviceable. And I know I can't remember what the cap situation looks like. I think he'd restructure it for this year to help reduce the cap hit because, of course, the Saints are always doing cap gymnastics. But
the cap is cap hell right now. I'm glad you brought that up. But what Chu's referring to for my audience on Spotify, I can't see your screen. We actually have up a PFF ranking. Looking at the offensive line, you got left tackle Penning graded 53.6. That's not a starter. Left guard Hurts 58.7. That's just as bad. The center, 79.4, McCoy. Okay, they got a center. Right guard, 51.2, Ruiz. And then Ramczak, 73.5. So really, they only have 2 linemen. That's what's sad. The Sean Payton era, it seemed like they were getting linemen in every draft. This team clearly is hurting at offensive line. And that was my number 2 need, offensive line. The Saints were actually ranked 23rd on pass protection. And they had to bench their first-round selection, Trevor Penning. So, yeah, offensive line's a huge one. And then my last team need was defensive line, which I'll show you a little bit later below. They need somebody else outside of Granderson to help them, and they're aging quickly. But for you, team needs, defensive line, quarterback, offensive line. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I think, specifically when you talk about quarterback, because I think it was last year they took Jake Hayner, who I think he had a reasonably good preseason, but someone who, with the crop of quarterbacks this year, I do think that, let's see their pick. So their round 2 pick is 45. They don't have a pick they have a second round pick, and then it's not till the 5th round that they actually have a bunch of picks. So 5th, 6th, and 7th. So they don't have a 3rd or a 4th rounder. So that might be a unique situation where if they really want to get a quarterback that may fall that could actually still be serviceable. I mean, could it be a Spencer Rattler or something like that? I'm not sure. They probably would still have to trade up before the 5th round to get them. But I still think they could get, the first round tackle on the offensive side, the 2nd round defensive tackle for the interior line. And I do think they could trade up to possibly get a quarterback that could fall.
Interesting. Yeah, because I don't know how that's going to rifle out. Minnesota's moving up. Washington's moving up. New England's moving up. Broncos are sniffing at it. The Raiders may try to do the whole carousel with Minshew and the guy, but I'm just like, I don't know. Like, there's not enough quarterbacks for everybody to go around. They may end up with Carr another year. Who knows?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that I could tell what they were trying to do in it seemed like Card kind of worn his welcome out with the Raiders. And I think for a lot of people, you're going to see it as like, well, I mean, he was at least an above average quarterback. Like, what's going on here? Why is he getting so much hate? And I don't think you're seeing now why he did. I think it just feels like a much different situation that he's in now. But he's shown to have been productive, or at least serviceable at a certain point in his career. And I don't know what happened last year. It really seemed like something was off with him. But hopefully in offseason, everything can get him right, get him working with Olave and Rashid Shaheed and some of these guys.
And that's the thing that kills me too. When you get the wide receivers, it's such a good room. Like, what are we doing, Carr? You know,
Rashid Shaheed, and I know we'll talk about it in a second, but I think he is a tremendous auxiliary receiver, second guy. And I mean, he basically just earned a role off of being a deep burner downfield, but I think has really kind of refined how he plays the receiver position. And I think him playing alongside Olave, and they got a couple other guys. I think Cedric Wilson, I want to say they got him.
Yeah.
Loved him in Dallas. He kind of flamed out in Miami, not through his fault of his own. I think he got hurt and other guys overplayed him, but
I'm interested in your take on all that. I guess I should do defensive linemen first, and then I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah.
So one thing about this team that I always thought was unique, you hear a lot of guys talk about, oh, they run a cover 1, a cover 3, a cover 4, sometimes even cover 2. This is the only NFL team that runs a cover 5 because most NFL teams don't do it. They call it cover 2 man, and they stay in this coverage for quite a bit. It's fancy talk. What does that mean? They're defensive linemen. They penetrate, they tackle, they make the play onto the run. These corners, slots, for the Saints historically, whoever the slot corner is going to be, from Marshawn Lattimore all the way down throughout the years, whoever that guy in the slot is, he ends up making plays usually. And that kind of lets the linebackers rove and free around a little bit. But yeah, it's a cover 5 defense when you guys really look at it. What happened last year, especially down the stretch, it looked like this team got beat up. I mean, they lost a couple games down the stretch, you know. This unit, the defensive line, it wasn't that good, and it was kind of hard to explain, but it was very noticeable. They ranked 28th in sacks. They had a sack rate of just 5.4. You know, I had to look that up, and that's not good at all. They had the 14th most rushing yards against them, and the unit was, you know, very underwhelming considering the big names here that I'm about to describe. The only exception to me was Carl Granderson. He ranked 7th best in PFF. He had a breakout year as expected. He had career highs, 73 tackles, 8.5 sacks. You know, whenever you get a defensive lineman that makes that many tackles, that's impressive, you know. On his other side, we had Cameron Jordan, who had a very underwhelming year. He's starting to show his age. He just had 2 sacks. He didn't have one of those years that we usually see him doing. He ranked just 42nd overall PFF. He's turning 35. He's on that age cliff. He's on the end of it. If I was a dynasty manager, I'd be looking to get off him and trade him quick. The writing's been on the wall for a couple of years now, but you can probably get something back because he's a name. Now, the guys that aren't names are in the middle. They're clogging it up. These guys are, you know, only for the deepest of deepest IDP degenerates. Kalen Saunders is the one guy. Nathan Shepard is the other. I'm expecting them to be better than they were last year. I really am. The hope here is that, you know, one or both of them can kind of explode. And if they don't, it's okay because we got a rookie class in back of them for depth. I'm excited about this rookie class. But I'm thinking between Saunders and Shepard, I think Saunders is playable. He's a better run stopper than most people give him credit for. Not really known for pass rushing. The rookies you got here, we got a guy named Isaiah Foskey, who was a Notre Dame superstar. He hasn't really developed in the NFL yet. The other guy's name is Brian Breesy. Okay, Brian Breesy was a 5-star recruit coming out of college, high pedigree. He got some run last year, but we're going to be counting on these players for this season and above. Why I say that? Because they were both top 40 picks. You know, there's a thing called draft capital, and you got to believe they're going to use these guys, okay? Breesy was very good at penetrating. He should improve. Foskey got hurt, so we're going to chalk it up as a mulligan. We'll expect more out of both these guys next year. Of course, Breesy was the first-round pick. Foskey was the second-round pick. But that's kind of this defensive line in a whole. Couple misses here. They're going to need to get better. They're going to need to get better and improve this position. Chew, as far as going back to the offense before I go into linebackers, what do you see with this group? Anything stick out? Anything jump out to you?
So I kind of started on it, but looking at these wide receivers, Chris Olave, I think he had a bit of a down year compared to, when you wanted to see who would separate themselves as a Chris Olave, as a Garrett Wilson. You see a lot of these guys, whether it's in the same class or in adjacent classes for wide receivers. And, I think that I really think that he could step up, and you now have Michael Thomas no longer there. And again, I mentioned Rashid Shaheed. I do think he's a great player. I do think that, they brought in Cedric Wilson Jr., loved him in Dallas, but, I do think the belief is that Shaheed is going to be stepping up and taking that second wide receiver position. I think he can do well in it. There is a bit of depth, and a guy who I really, really liked coming out of college, a bit older of a prospect, and he did actually get a little bit of run last year in A.T. Perry out of Wake Forest. So
I'm glad you said it. I was waiting to see if you got him. He was such a highly coveted rookie early in the year, and they kind of fell down. But he had some moments last year.
Yeah, I think they've got, outside of Olave, I feel like just in terms of namesake, it can seem like just a group of guys. But I do think a lot of these guys have shown promise at one point or another, again, whether it be back once they were in college or once they've made it to the pros, and at some point in a season, they've shown what they can do. And, whether you want to tie that to, can Carr get it together and really connect with these guys, or is it these guys growing their skill set and really kind of taking a step up to the next level? And that does include a lot of he really needs to set himself apart. Yeah.
I don't know if Carr can do it, but yeah, so for your guy Perry, A.T. Perry, week 18, wide receiver 12, right there, 2 touchdowns really did it for him. And then, we've seen splashes with the other guys too, but I kind of like this wide receiver core.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very good group, and again, it all hinges on Derek Carr. I don't know what he's going to do, but we've got our fingers crossed. But that's honestly a big reason why I think it's going to end up being the Saints and the Panthers battling for 4th in the division. So,
you know what? We're going to move on to linebacker real quick here. So just talking about this linebacker core, okay? When I look at their core, it really comes down to 2 players. And probably not the 2 most people are thinking I'm talking about. But there's 2 interesting players to me. We're going to start with Demario Davis. Okay, he's older. I've been hearing for years to get off him. I've been hearing this, but guess what? Demario Davis is a model of consistency. For 6 years in a row now, Davis has had at least 2 or more sacks with 100-plus tackles, and he's got another Pro Bowl. I mean, he's pretty steady as they come. Most people would think the LB2 here is Pete Werner. He's had a poor season. And the thing with Pete Werner, if he doesn't get you major tackles, he's not known as a turnover guy. I mean, he's had them, but he's not known for it. That's not his game. Because of this cover 5 scheme, he's kind of back there roving around. A lot of people say his nickname is Stinky Pete. I'm not going to go there. I'm never going to tarnish the player's name. But if he honestly got 1 or 2 more tackles a game, he'd probably be a top 50, top 40 linebacker play. But the fact that he doesn't, his tackle numbers are down. He's probably a real-life solid player, but he's a victim of the moment. He's a victim of the tackles don't get to him. Everyone else is getting them. You're going to see this cornerback core, which I like. Some of the safeties, they're going to get the plays where he doesn't. And it's just the scheme, sadly. But Pete Werner's your guy here after Davis. He gets drafted ahead of most linebackers that are doing better than him. So usually I see Werner on the board. I look at the potential, but I tend to punt him. There's a really sneaky ad this team picked up. The guy's name is Willie Gay. He's been interesting. He's been on the Chiefs. 231 tackles on 47 starts over there in Kansas City. I'm interested to see how they deploy him because, like I said, his linebacker core doesn't get a lot of run per se. But one thing Gay can do, Gay's a thumper. One thing Gay can do is get to the quarterback. I was excited for him in free agency. And I thought he was going to go to a team where they're going to use him because Kansas City similarly has a bunch of linebackers now, Bolton, Tranquil, Chanel. He was kind of in the pecking order. He's kind of fighting for depth again, but I actually like him better than I do Werner, even though he's the LB3 here. And then the other name you guys might know or need to know was the guy last year who was the 3rd linebacker. His name is Zach Bond. He actually signed with the Eagles, so Gay's going to replace him. Nickname, he was named as senior sack in college, but he didn't get any run. He didn't do much, so it's not going to take much for Gay to make this team. It's not going to take much for Gay to replace Bond, and it may not take much for Gay to actually overall take over Werner. And if I'm wrong on that third point, the very least, Gay's there. Gay's a younger guy. I looked it up the other day. He's younger than I thought he was. I was like, really? So he may actually be the replacement for Demario Davis moving forward.
Yeah, sounds
That's
good.
all I got. Yeah, what do you got on any thoughts on offense?
On offense, I'm thinking tight end. So this team is one, as we were talking about the history of the division, you think about the Jimmy Graham era, you think about just the uber athletic basketball skills tight end, and now you're left with Juwan Johnson and Taysom Hill. It's a bit of a change up, but I really think, Juwan Johnson, he's shown flashes. I want to say it was in 2022 was when he had his touchdown season, his touchdown excess, which has yet to be replicated, of course, whether it be before or after that year. Otherwise, he has battled injuries as well. So I don't know if it's being able to kind of get ramped up and have that consistency of staying on the field. But Taysom Hill, he's getting a bit older at this point. And I'm not saying that the novelty of Taysom Hill as a quarterback, as a runner, and as a tight end is wearing thin. I think last season it was a great opportunity for Taysom Hill to get a bit more run literally as a rusher than he had previously with, I believe it was the suspension of Kamara and then the injury of Jamal Williams. But again, he's a guy, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 really fantasy relevant games, which were booming games, don't get me wrong. But if you start him and hope for 21 points and end up getting 0.5 points, both are just as likely, if not the 0.5 is more likely. So that's one thing where I don't know that they're necessarily going to be able to address that in the draft. There are a number of good athletic tight ends, but I think they have needs elsewhere. So these are guys where, from a fantasy perspective, certainly if it's in best ball, if you want to take, I love my Taysom Hill dart throws in best ball. If you want to do that, go for it. But Juwan Johnson, I do see him kind of on a similar level as Cade Otton, but I think Cade Otton has a bit more upside in terms of, week in and week out, trusting him and his connection with Baker.
I like what you said on Juwan Johnson, and I usually pick him up as a tight end, like deep leagues at the end. Just want to give you a stat because I wrote a little bit of article on him last year. In the 2022 season, what you were talking about, from week 7 to week 11, he was tight end 2, tight end 37. I guess he had a bad week then, right? Tight end 8, tight end 4, tight end 6, bye week tight end 2. So he was on a streak. A guy like Carr, you would think, hey, he's going to probably unlock him. But it really didn't happen last year. There were a couple games last year that he actually did produce, but it wasn't enough to kind of warrant consistency unless you're in deeper leagues like me and Chew are. But yeah, week 16 he was tight end 5, and in week 17 he was tight end 1 with 12 targets, 8 receptions, a touchdown. He's doable. He's startable. I don't chase Tyson Hill. A lot of my friends do. I don't care. I don't know what I'm going to get with him. I get the idea of putting him as a tight end when he can be a running back. And I know he had a career high, I think it was 33 receptions last year. Mm-hmm. I just don't chase it. I'd rather the 1 in the hand versus 2 in the bush, No,
it's again, this Taysom Hill, best ball only. If you need to pick him up otherwise, then it's a deep league and you have a lot of injuries to tight ends.
Yeah. This defensive back core, like I mentioned, defensive backs, all right, they play this cover 5 kind of scheme. So what that does is it allows a lot of players, whether you're adding an extra – so that's another thing. This team generally plays 2 linebackers generally. So that gives an opportunity for another corner to come in or a slot to go down in a pinch and get some runs. When you think of this defensive back core, you're starting with none other than Marshawn Lattimore. He's a big name to know. He's a shutdown corner. But what you need to know here is he didn't have a year like he normally does. He didn't. He actually got hurt. He missed 7 games last year. So, just keep that in mind as these guys get older, going from season to season. There's also rumors right now he's possibly getting traded. Again, I wrote this article earlier in the year, so just be mindful of it. Currently right now, by the time we get to the season, he may or may not be still on this team. But Lattimore is your name to know. He's always been. but we had a couple other guys step up. The name I want to mention now, the guy's name is Paulson Adebo, okay? PFF had him as a secret superstar last year in the making. He had 80.5 coverage grade. He ranked 15th amongst all cornerbacks in the NFL, all of them. There was only a couple guys that were like really ahead of him, but he allowed just a completion rate of 54.1, and he's the third cornerback on this team. So add him in there, Paulson Adebo, put Marshawn Lattimore in here, and then there's another guy, Alontae Taylor. He challenged Adebo for a good portion of the year, but we started to see his weakness. He was starting to get cooked a little bit in coverage. He's more of a slot guy. He's more take that back. He plays better on the outside as he does in the slot, as opposed to Adebo, who's more of your slot guy. So those are your three major players here. Here's where it gets a little spicy. A lot of people know the safety, Tyrone Matthew. He suits up every week. He's known. He'll get you 100% snaps. I think he started all 34 games for this team. He's had 7 interceptions in that time. He's been okay-ish. I'm not knocking him. We just expected so much more out of the Honey Badger. We expected so much more out of him. He's probably at the end of his career. And again, right now, at the time of this podcast, he's contemplating retirement at some point one of these days, but he wants to stay a Saint. So for what you got a solid player. The other player I want to look at, the other player that I'm predicting is going to be a starter, and actually PFF has it too. PFF has this guy now on the other side. His name is Howden, okay? He replaced Marcus May, which is the name that most people know. Well, I know him as always being injured. So soon as May went out of the lineup, Howden got in there. He got to play 16 out of 17 games. He was a fifth-round rookie, replaces Marcus May, who was the big free agent hookup, right? Howden ends up with 43 total tackles, 5 pass breakups. Okay, I have Howden going in a lot of deep safety leagues. You'll always hear, Chew, you can always start safeties late because there's so many of them, and they're replaceable. But this is one of those things with Howden. They didn't have to re-sign May. So, again, this team's in a bit of salary cap hell, right? So they're able to save some money because May missed all 17 games. And he missed, I take that back. He missed 17 games for 2 seasons. Okay, so he can play and be moved around. I'm expecting a bigger year out of Howden, more than people realize. And I'm probably playing him, I don't know, as my DB3 and maybe league sizes of league 14 team leagues, 16 team leagues or greater.
Well, and you mentioned the salary cap hill, and I think there's no greater source of that from that position than Alvin Kamara out of that running back group.
Ding ding.
He is what he came back from last season. So he was the 3 games of suspension. He came back and he was tied for the second most targets of any running back, and that was again only playing in 14 games instead of 17, like Breece Hall, who had led the league, and Bijan Robinson as well. I mean, talk about what Derek Carr wasn't doing correctly. He just looked at Alvin Kamara and said, nothing else is working. I'm just going to throw you the ball. Alvin Kamara is continuing to be just a PPR darling. Again, I know he's getting a bit older as a running back. We all have those concerns about that, but he's another guy where he is an effective and powerful runner, I think more so than he's giving credit for, considering his receiving prowess. I think we want to just see him be throwing the ball, but he can be a good runner out of the backfield. And I think a lot of people were maybe concerned when the Saints had drafted Kendre Miller, thinking that he was going to just kind of take over. And I know he did have a bit of injury last year in his rookie season. But even when healthy, I really don't think we were looking at a running back who is going to take the reins from Alvin Kamara. I think Alvin Kamara is going to need them to be ripped from his hands, because I don't think Kendre is going to do it, even this season if he's fully healthy. Jamal Williams, who only a season before led the NFL in rushing touchdowns for the Lions, and then he comes on over to the Saints and just drops an absolute goose egg. And of course he was injured, but when he wasn't injured and it was expected that he and Kendre were going to be the dynamic duo until Kamara came back, they were neither of that, and they needed Kamara to come back. And Kamara, again, like I mentioned about the cap space, he's another guy where they're trying to ride it out. They're fortunate, obviously, that he is an incredibly productive player on that team with what his cap hit is. But I think they're going to be that's one of the things that they're going to have to be dealing with probably this season and next season to kind of figure out, well, once Kamara is gone, thank you for the cap space, but where's the production? It's not going to come from the rest of this roster at this point.
That's what I was going to ask you, though, because like there was talk earlier in the year, oh, this team's in cap hell. We're going to move on from Kamara and maybe have Kendra Miller take the role. You don't see any of that. You think that's just smoke in mirrors?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the specific ins and outs of how much of a benefit maybe they can get from Kamara outside of him willingly restructuring. If it's them being able to just them independent of what he wants to do, be able to actually shed cap hit, maybe spread it out over a couple of years, I'm sure. But with what he's doing, unless they're willingly really trying to tank, I don't know why would you be getting rid of Kamara because I was not a big Kendra Miller fan coming out of college, and not to think that he was a terrible running back, but I think what a lot of people saw, I think it was a couple of highlight plays, and I feel like when you look at the totality of what he did in college, I feel like it didn't see it coming into where he could step into a 3-down role and excel in the way that people were maybe hoping to. And again, it's kind of unfair to say, you need to be Alvin Kamara. That's a tall task. But even for what Kendra can do himself, I really just think they've probably got to look elsewhere, whether it be later in this draft. Again, I mentioned they have a number of 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks. And I think with seemingly what a lot of people think about the running backs in this draft, I don't expect any first rounders. There may only be 1 or 2 in the second round. I think there's going to be a lot of these running backs that get pushed later in the draft that maybe are more raw prospects. But I mean, you have Kendra Miller. Why not pick somebody else and see what happens?
So are you expecting this team to finish at what, third place? Is that your prediction?
Yeah, as optimistic as I am about the Panthers, I do think they're still last place, but I think there's a world in where they're 1 win below the Saints, and who knows how the end of the season finishes out.
Yeah, I have them as second, but like I said, I do, based on what we're hearing and the salary cap moves, they're another team needs to hit it big in the draft because they're dying. And I think if they don't get it right this year, they're going to be in a rebuild.
Yep, 100%.
A team on the rise, though, is our third team here, the Atlanta Falcons. Couple things here. First closing thoughts I want to say is you would think the way this team finished, it was 7-10. You would think it was the defense's fault. Defense actually was okay, but the other talking point is they're going from a 4-3 to a 3-4, which I'll explain, why that matters. But let me give you some stats on the Falcons, okay? Total offense, they were 17th, 33.3. Rushing offense, they were 9th, 127. Passing, 22nd, 207.3. The total defense, they were 11th. I was shocked by that. I didn't think the Falcons were 11th, right? 321.1. Their passing defense was 20th, 118.2. I'm sorry, their rushing defense was 20th. Their passing defense was 8th with 202.9. Again, the team finished to 7-10. They had a couple surprise injuries with Troy Anderson, what have you. We even had Grady Jarrett go down a little bit. Ryan Neeson went over to Jacksonville, who's a quality defensive lineman coach. We get this guy Jimmy Lake in here, and he's historically going to run a 3-4, so he's trying to put his own pieces together. So, what says you about this team and any kind of team needs you're looking at? Because I'll tell you mine in a second. But any thoughts on the Falcons?
So I think the biggest thing that was very interesting, like you were saying about kind of what we all think about what was the Achilles heel of this team last year. I do still think the team need likely are going to be on the edge and with the cornerbacks. I think those are the biggest ones. If I'm going to look at all, if there is any bit of value to be had a little bit later in the draft, I know everyone's excited about Kirk Cousins. I know he's going to unlock Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, but I do think there still is a bit of a weakness on the offensive line. Probably it could just be depth if you don't want to spend a premium first or second round pick on that, but I do think it needs to be addressed. And I do know that they also addressed the wide receiver depth in getting a Darnell Mooney and a Rondale Moore. I don't think it could hurt to get another wide receiver. Again, this class is so deep at wide receiver, and I think it would be foolish not to get one of these guys at the latest 4th round, maybe 5th, but I think you need to get somebody there.
Yeah, that's what I said too. So I had number 1 team need was defensive line or edge. You got Lorenzo Carter starting on one side. You want to be a 3-4. Are you kidding me? get anyone in there as an instant upgrade. Carter hasn't been that great. 5 sacks or more in any of his 6 seasons. I think he had one time 5 sacks. So, like you said, you need a starter. You definitely need the cornerback. That was my number 2. I'm looking at PFF right now. Who the heck is over there? Is there a quality corner outside of AJ Terrell? The problem is I don't see it on this roster. I think they're going to go to the draft. One thing, Chew, this year, yeah, look, Phillips is 59 ranked and their slot is 51.8. You can get corners this year. I got 8 that I would love to play in IDP right now. This is a quality, very good draft for cornerback. So I can see him going there. And then my third one, you hit it. You said it real well. I thought that was a smart take. Outside of Mooney and outside of Drake London, I don't really see any wide receivers that scare me as a threat. I mean, I know you got Kirk Cousins, who's usually a good manager of the ball and getting it down there, but I don't even know who the third guy is. I'd have to look at PFF here. Like, I'm not afraid of any of that more. I guess you can say Pitts can be our third guy, but I'm not scared. I'm not afraid of any of that, you know?
Yeah, and the big thing I think that people kind of forget about, I know it's exciting to get Cousins. He's a tremendous quarterback. He is coming off the injury. I think people really need to remember that. I know he's not a mobile quarterback. I think I saw him on an interview. They were asking him about his rehab, and he was like, I'm not there yet. I'm really, working to kind of get back to, like certainly once we get into July and August, I'm going to be ready. But, he's kind of talking about when he has to do the bootlegs and roll out. He was like, I'm not there to really do that yet. But he's like, but I mean, I can take dropbacks right now. He's like, my doctor, my staff and everything, they remind me that, I'm a pocket guy, but he's like, but I mean, I can't be in the pocket. I need, at some point we'll need to get out of the pocket. I can't just be a vulnerable quarterback and sitting there in the pocket and just get destroyed because I can't roll out.
Right.
But I do think that people need to remember that, London, I think we've been waiting for him to kind of take that next step. And don't even get me started on Desmond Ridder. He's the guy that Alec Pierce made look good at Cincinnati. That's how I feel about him as a quarterback. So believe me, I understand that London has not had the good fortune of playing with good quarterbacks, but I don't know that Cousins, say, is going to elevate London high enough. Cousins first was dealing with Justin Jefferson last year, Jordan Addison. KJ Osborne is no slouch at all. I think he's a tremendous pickup for where he went in New England, I believe. So he had TJ Hawkinson the last 2 seasons. So Kirk Cousins is coming from a tremendous group of weapons. And I'm not saying the guys that they have in Atlanta are bad, but it's a tough competition compared to what he had in Minnesota.
Yeah, and then moving on to the other side of this, let's talk about the defensive line. The team is bad at creating pressure. It really is. That's something that they need, whoever they're going to bring in. Again, this is a quality defensive lineman edge class. You can get both your needs knocked out right there. All your needs, if you want to be technical, cornerback, good class, wide receiver, good class. So I can see them attacking the draft. But this team was bad, like I've seen with the pressures. They had 32.7%. That's 24th in the league. And then they allowed 3.8 yards per carry after the running back takes contact. So that was 14th in the league. So they're not good stopping the run. They're not good pass rushing. There are 2 guys here, if you're going to run a 3-4, to consider. Grady Jarrett, who's always been a great player, he fell to injuries. We found a player last year, hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, David Animata. He came off last year, and he had an impressive season. He was one of my waiver wire guys. He's penciling to start again. He registered 12 run stuffs. That ranked him 18th amongst that interior lineman position. Those guys don't get out much, but I think those 2 can put something together. We just need another quality edge. There's a couple depth pieces here. There's a 3rd-round guy, Zach Harrison. He struggled in a 3-4 scheme, so I don't know what he's going to do now. And then Taquan Graham, he had knee injuries. That stuff's going to linger. There's guys that remain unsigned, Calais Campbell, Bud Dupree. I don't know if they're going to come back to the team. Bud Dupree's leaving with 6.5 sacks in his pocket. Chew, if I may, I'm going to run through the linebackers too here because I'm thinking some of these guys may end up being another edge player that may be of value. We got 4 guys in here. I mentioned Lorenzo Carter. He was labeled a starter, 3 sacks, underwhelming. He doesn't really do much. I think the draft's going to replace him. We got a sleeper in Arnold Ebiketie. He was drafted under Dean Pease when he was there. Okay, he ran a 3.4. Okay, he's considered a 3.4 player, so he may excel in this. Despite being held back last year and not being a part of the system and coming off the bench a lot, he actually did get 6 sacks and 12 QB hits. So he's a sneaky player to pick up now. I've been picking him up. And then the other two linebackers are more inside. Caden Ellis is a very good pass rusher as well. He's got 122 tackles, second on the team to only Nate Landman, who left in free agency. Troy Anderson's your LB1 to own here. He can probably get picked up in leagues because he's still lingering off the IR. A few years ago in 2022, he played just 2 games before suffering a torn pec. He should be back to full potential next year, but this linebacker core looks pretty good, and I like the interior. If we can just figure out who's going to play these ends, I think you might have a team building right now. What's your thoughts?
I think so. I think with, what the defense has looked like in years past, I think, if they draft right, and again, depending on how all this works out with what they're doing with the defense in terms of the formation and everything, that I think is going to be the catalyst for, is it, how you were talking about, I think you'd had the Saints at 2 and then the Falcons at 3, or, are the Falcons going to really take another step up? That's going to be what helps propel them to actually win this division. I feel like for so many years, even when the Saints were not winning the division, what has helped them keep them kind of at the steady second, if not first, back and forth, was the defense. It's just been perennially a very successful defense, certainly specifically in the division as when they play one another. But I feel like year in and year out, you've thought, that's kind of the calling card for the Saints. And I can't say that's really been the same thing for the Falcons. So the fact that really you can look up and see what the offense is going to do of taking a step forward, but if the defense can also do that against like what you were talking about specifically on the D-line, I think that can be tremendously helpful. Oh, did I lose you? Can you hear me? Oh. Oh, there.
Question for you. We had a little bit of pause there. Sorry about that.
No problem.
As far as the offense for the Falcons here, is there anything that we were leaving out? Is there anything that you wanted to highlight in regards to these guys?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know that really much even needs to be said about the running. I mean, we know Bijan. Now it's a new offensive coordinator, so I think we're just going to be excited to have Bijan not suppressed. But I think the main focus has always been, we got Kirk Cousins. He's throwing to Drake London. How is that going to look? Like that's kind of as exciting as it is for the offense. It's kind of so limited to just Kirk Cousins, pretty much.
Right. So, in regards to this final category, in regards to the defensive backs, I have some concerns. So, I kind of wanted to go through these guys. When you look at the stats on them, it looks like they were a good passing defense, right? But sometimes when it's easier to run on a team, they're just going to keep doing that. Why even take the chance of a pass, okay? The Falcons gave up 6.8 yards per pass attempt. Again, let's look through this through the proper lens. They actually ranked 20th per drop back passes. So when teams did throw the ball, they did get over on this team, okay? It's a lot easier to run on a team, than it is on a defense. So, again, Let's look at some of the players that may need to be replaced. AJ Terrell is not one. AJ Terrell is a really good real-life player. But there's concerns anything on the outside to me. They had a guy, D. Alford, there. He's a decent slot tackler. Clark Phillips III, fourth-round pick in 2023. He doesn't have the top-end speed, and he gets burned a lot. Antonio Hamilton, I guess, mixes in. But, potentially I'm thinking that both of those guys can be replaced anytime. The fun of this team was Jesse Bates. Jesse Bates came in here and just tore it up. Most of last season, in a coverage 6 kind of coverage, like way back there, he generated a lot of forced fumbles, interceptions, had 132 tackles, 89 solos, okay? 6 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles. He earned himself an all-pro, second team all-pro. The name that most people want to talk about, it's Richie Grant here. Guess what? Richie Grant got benched a lot last year. And if you're noticing, he's not the other safety here. So for my audience at home, for the people on Spotify that don't know, that there's a guy named DeMarco Helms. He stepped in and replaced Grant, and he's a sneaky ad for me in best balls. He's a sneaky ad for me in a lot of leagues. Helms is an interesting case study, okay? He came in the NFL, kind of not really touted despite being a high pedigree prospect. I'm going to tell you what happened to him, Chew. When he was in college, you know who Jalen Hyatt is, of course, right?
Oh, yeah.
Jalen Hyatt had that 5-touchdown game when he was at Tennessee against Alabama. Well, the 5 touchdowns were against this guy. So
you don't want that on your resume.
Yeah. So everything he did up to that point was off people's radars. He comes in the NFL a victim of the Jalen Hyatt. I'd love to see those guys match up now. But yeah, a lot of people didn't really think this kid can play. But if you were following Devy earlier, he barely made the NFL to 7th-round pick. And now he's replacing Grant in the lineup. So just, again, everyone's allowed to have a bad game or two. But that's the story on him. He can play. A lot of people are thinking that's going to be Grant's job. Whenever I see him get drafted before Helms, I kind of laugh because a lot of people aren't paying attention to this team. I think a quick summary overall, Chew, I think the Falcons have key young players in key positions. They possess talent. Their IDP prospects are good. If they can figure out this pass rush, wide receiver, depth, cornerback, they could be knocking sooner than most say. What says you about the Falcons?
I think exactly the same. I think this could be the time that the power dynamic kind of shifts within the division. Again, it's tricky because you see what the Buccaneers did last year. Some say they maybe, overachieved in terms of what the expectations were to start the season. But who's to say that they didn't also stabilize and kind of, gain some strength through the end of the season and can carry that over. But yeah, with the Falcons, like you're saying, I think there's some pieces in place. They bring in a steady veteran presence who's produced at a high level in Kirk Cousins. And I think the big kind of catalyst for them, they have that 8th pick. And I think with so much happening before them, whether it be all the quarterbacks or, maybe a couple of offensive tackles here and there, they're going to be in a pretty advantageous position to be like, are we going edge? Are we going cornerback? And best player available, in my opinion. It's whoever their scouts and wherever they feel. I don't think they can go wrong. And I'm saying that now, and I've said that for teams before, and sometimes they do go wrong and they give you that head-scratcher pick, but I think there's a lot of talent at both of those positions. I think they could get their guy.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm kind of curious about this last category here, this last team, how you're going to feel about the Carolina Panthers. I know by the numbers, this team is kind of screaming, hey, prove-it year. A lot of guys on prove-it year deals, a lot of journeymen coming in. I kind of like what they're doing. They're putting pieces in place, but let me read you last year's stats. Total offense, they were 32nd, bottom of the league, 265.3. Rushing, 20th, 104.1. I kind of have some questions on that too for you. I'm interested in that. Passing, 32nd, bottom of the league again, 161.2. Defense, 4th, 293.9. Usually when you have a bad offense, you got defense on the field, right? Against the run, they were 23rd, 122.4. And against the pass, they were 3rd, 171.5. We see another year of this. What says you about this team? I know it's one of your favorite teams to watch here, right? If not your favorite team. What do you say about team needs?
Well, I could give you the shortest answer, which is everything. Because unfortunately, I mean, with a number of the additions that they made this offseason thus far, we still have the draft, of course. Unfortunately, they lost a couple of key defensive players, in Luvu, Chin. I won't say Dante Jackson because I thought he had got burned a number of times over his career, or that was he's gotten better, I think, on a play-by-play basis, but the fact that the big plays he gives up, it makes my stomach turn every time. Of course, Brian Burns, that trade. I think there's a lot, when you talk about statistically the defense, that's not the shining point in this team, but if there was one, that would be it. And it's tough to see a lot of that talent go out the door. But I think what the Panthers have done thus far in the offseason to focus on protect Bryce Young. We need to build that interior offensive line. That's tremendously important. And get him a weapon in Deontay Johnson. Again, like we mentioned on the defense, we've got a couple guys over there, Ashawn Robinson, DJ Wanham. Let's see, Jordan Fuller, Josie Jewell, Dane Jackson. They got a lot of guys that I'm really excited about. And Evero, the defensive coordinator, who he's played with a lot of these guys in his prior stops in the NFL. So I'm cautiously optimistic that a lot of these guys can kind of, be plug and play for defense, and on the offensive side, at least see some growth. But let's be honest, before going into the offseason, before any of the Kirk Cousins move happened, before any Baker was re-signed, before any of these moves with the Panthers, I knew that this is the worst division in football. After all of those moves, I do still believe this is the worst division in football, but I'm optimistic that I think some of these teams, including the Panthers, are trending in the right direction. But likely, Panthers are going to be last in the division again.
So team needs, it screams, and I love it when stats and metrics match up together from what I see on film. You look at the PFF screen. For the audience at home that can't see it, we're on PFF. We're looking on screen. The YouTube audience can see. Look at that center's grade. What is he, 45 something? It's screaming, we can put a pass rush on you, and we can get your tiny rookie quarterback, right? Offensive line gave up 65 sacks last year. That's a huge, huge red flag, especially down the middle there. We got to clean that up. And then you said it yourself, wide receiver. I think we need better playmakers for this guy. Besides, Adam Thielen's getting older. I don't know how you feel about Jonathan Mingo. I'll wait for that part. But the third one here is cornerback. When I look at cornerback, I'm not impressed at all. I look at cornerback. There's one guy out here. J.C. Horn, he actually, 2 years ago, he had all these stats against the number one receivers, but he's been in and out of the lineups. But look at the other guys, Jackson and Hill. You're in yellow, 62.7, 61.3. How are you supposed to contend with Drake London every week, Mike Evans every week, Olive every week? I think they need to clean up these cornerbacks. I really do. And then, we got guys, around here, Fuller, suspect, he's a little bit older. Woods is still rocking it. But yeah, those are my areas. I think offensive line, and I think corner, and I think wide receiver will that they won't be winning a lot of games this year, but it'll keep them in there a little closer. What says you about the quarterback position?
Going into that draft, a lot of it, I looked at it from the fantasy perspective and thinking, I thought Anthony Richardson was the guy, and I really wanted them to go get him. I understood that if they got Anthony Richardson and didn't go Stroud or Young, a guy that's, Richardson's a bit less polished than these other guys, a bit less accomplished, all that kind of stuff. So I understood why they went for Young, but so many of these guys, especially the quarterback taken first overall, they're going to atrocious situations. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a trash can gets much trashier than what the Panthers looked like last year. It wasn't just the level of talent that they put around him. The offensive line went through a number of, injuries, and it was a revolving door, but the offensive system I feel like they had in place, which was atrocious. The amount of time that so many of the routes were taking to develop. I got the chance to go to Charlotte to Bank of America Stadium and watch them play when they played the Texans. So actually got to see one of their victories. But even when I was watching, I'm like, this is terrible. Everything is taking so long to develop. It's this small quarterback that is running for his life as much as he possibly can. And he basically just panics and throws it in Adam Thielen's direction most of the time, which is the reason why he got a tremendous amount of targets at his, the ripe age of 33, 34. There's no way that offense can continue the way it was.
I was going to ask you, you see Thielen getting peppered again this year? Or?
He doesn't strike me as another, I'm very high on Deontay Johnson. I think he's going to be a 130-plus target guy. I don't know that I see Thielen cracking 100 targets, but I do think he's going to be a pressure target guy. Like, when we need those key third downs and stuff, I think he's going to be used in a more strategic way like that. So,
gotcha. Talking about the defensive line, okay, we've been meddling a little bit. We've been talking, a little hinting. I'm kind of interested in this because it's kind of like they're putting together a lot of guys, and they're like, prove it. You did it last year, prove it. You had a bad year last year, prove it was wrong. You say you're a top pick, prove it. So it's kind of interesting. This unit has been up and down. It looks like a strong unit at times. And then, there's other times it looks like they're exhausted. They left it on the field. They ranked 6th in allowing only 6.5 yards per attempt last season. It's pretty good, right? But then they couldn't generate a turnover to save their life at the end of the year. I think they finished just 27 sacks. And then they had 8 interceptions, but 27 sacks for that unit that we had. So, of course, they gave the axe to Brian Burns. They let I can't know if I'm saying it right, Uter Gross Matos go. And then Frankie Louvu was a good rusher. Okay. That took away, and I kind of tweeted this, so I'm kind of proud of myself with this. Those 3 players, 12.5 sacks last season, that took away, Frankie Louvu had 5.5. That took away 70.5% of the pass rush on this team. So, yeah, they're losing players, but with that being said, there's going to be opportunity to do more. Okay, so now we got players that we just brought in, and a lot of these guys here have been my sleepers for a different reason. Okay, you got a guy coming in now, Clowney. Everybody knows Clowney's pedigree. Clowney was a high draft pick coming in. At times he busted. At times he looked good. Last year he had a decent year. Clowney had an okay year if you look it up. So, he's going to be logging a lot of snaps for this unit, which is going to be kind of exciting to see. You got a couple other players in here too that I'm kind of curious to see. Not just Clowney, but DJ Wonham. DJ Wonham comes over. He's labeled as like a DL LB type, okay? He's going to be assuming that I guess the Brian Burns role, and he's coming off an 8-sack campaign. That's why I'm saying prove it, right? That marks his second highest sack total in his career. On the other side, pairing up with Clowney, who actually had 9.5 last year. He had a commendable 15.7 pass rush. So I think those two can get it done. You got another guy here to consider. I forget his name, Chichiasen, however you say it. He's a journeyman at this point. He's a name. He's somebody in the back half of the top 70. I'm not too worried about him, but those are your ends. I'm okay with that. You know who I'm very much okay with? You got a guy named Derek Brown in the middle. For playing the middle, and for most of last year, they were playing, the 3-4. He was like kind of a nose tackle type. He's an incredible defensive tackle. He actually got 103 combined tackles last year. Sign me up for some Wooten. But I think between Clowney, Wonham, Brown, and a nice rotation there, I think that defensive line holds up. I'm okay with it. There's other positions. There's other fish to fry here. So, again, I don't think this is a position in need. I think they can get by with these veterans.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the biggest concern was, I know Clowney, I guess, was the latest addition to this kind of revamped defensive line. And, Wonnum was one guy who I think it was exciting to see. All right, he's someone who produced last year, and in Burns' down year, I think if we can see Wonnum kind of replicate, like kind of one-for-one, replicate that down Burns year, and you have Jadeveon Clowney. Between Jadeveon Clowney and Derek Brown, that is a wrecking defensive line. So I think we need to see like Amari Barno and a couple of these other rotational guys really step up. But if you can keep like a Jadeveon Clowney and Derek Brown healthy and in the lineup enough, I think that the defense can be pretty disruptive.
Yeah, there's a lot of good but not great, bend but don't break kind of mentality here, journeyman veteran. I think this plugs in. But yeah, I think the offense is where I have a lot of my questions. I'll turn it back over to you. What says you about the offense?
So looking at the running back position, I'm the most curious to see how this is going to kind of shake out. So in what I mentioned about Dave Canales coming over from Tampa Bay over to Carolina, Chuba Hubbard, I liked him coming out of college. I wasn't sure how he was going to develop in terms of what his overall role was going to be with the team. I don't think that they should have given the deal they gave to Miles Sanders when they did. Of course, now we've learned that the Philadelphia Eagles are basically just that you're going to be a running back that goes there and has the best season of your career, and then after you leave there, we don't know what's going to happen. No offense to DeAndre Swift in Chicago for this season, but Chuba Hubbard, I think, has rightfully overtaken Miles Sanders. And when you see what Rachaad White did in Tampa, again, like what I was mentioning, where it was Dave Canales still really kind of figuring it out. It was his first time being an offensive coordinator, despite his, I think, decade in the league, mostly with Seattle. And I really think once he committed to the run, also, of course, used them as receivers out of the backfield. I think Chuba Hubbard can do it all, and I think he wasn't tremendously efficient last season, but I think what you did see was he was the better of the two options between he and Miles Sanders. And I think even if they do, feature Miles Sanders a bit more than what they did last year, because I think he's better than how he fared last year, with an improved offensive line, especially on the inside, I think Chuba Hubbard can be a punishing running back to help maybe take the load off Bryce Young a little bit and really let him kind of open it up in the offense.
Yeah, and at some point last year that switched, and they had Hubbard. Hubbard got more than half this team's carries. He ended up with 902 rushing yards. I didn't know if that's going to continue this year. Do you see Miles Sanders trying to get the reins again? I'm not really sure how that's going to work out between the two of them, so I've been kind of sort of staying away. What's your thoughts there?
So, I mean, between the two, I don't see Miles Sanders kind of resuming the role he had previously, where it was him leading the backfield, even if it was narrowly. I do think he's still going to be a complimentary back. But, with Chuba Hubbard, I do see the elements of Rachaad White. I do see, he's a bit of a bigger back. He's got tremendous speed. He's certainly a capable pass catcher. I think whenever we do see, whether it's coach going to a different team or a coordinator becoming a coach for a different team, you always look to the previous team or teams that they had worked with to kind of see, all right, he had success here. How can we replicate that over here? And that's really where I see one of the things where I want Chuba Hubbard to be what Rachaad White was able to be in Tampa, if not a maybe more efficient, better version. But I don't know if we're going to get that, but I'm optimistic. And, when we look at running back and valuing them in fantasy, Chuba Hubbard is someone who I'm really looking to buy if people are viewing him, much further down, even if they think he's going to be a latter third in terms of PPR for running backs. I'll take that.
Yeah, and then looking at linebacker, there's really major two names to know here. Okay, and I'm trying to pronounce this defensive coordinator's name. I'm sure you know. What is it? Ejiro Evero? Is that how you say it?
Yeah,
that's an alliteration. Ejiro Evero. But anyway, in his system, he has these linebackers hit the ground running. Okay, he's had a guy, Jose Jewell, before. He comes over here. They know each other well from their days in Denver. So, Jose Jewell was always a player, top end picks. He's a good quality player, but he got, for some reason last year that the system Denver runs, he kind of got outplaced by Alex Singleton. So, of course he's going to come here on a prove it year, but he's always been, I guess he profiles as a tackling machine previous seasons. So he's your guy here. Okay, the other linebacker to own, again, this team doesn't necessarily use a lot of three linebacker looks. That third linebacker is probably going to be a Wonham or possibly even a Clowney type at times, but they're going to bring in extra corners, safeties to kind of match up with the wide receivers in this division. But there's another linebacker who's coming off IR. His name's Shaq Thompson. People can get him late in drafts right now because not only is the ADP jacked up in sleeper, but people aren't paying attention to him. They forget. He's commonly at the top 30, 40 linebacker at his position anyway, but he's coming off a year where he got hurt. What did he play? I think just 2 games last season. So he's been a quality option when healthy, but you got to give him an opportunity to get healthy and play. But I think Jewell and Thompson are a solid combo. I do. And I think up a depth chart, assuming they'll get back to 100% playing, I'm okay. Again, I keep going back to I'm okay with this position because there's so many other spots to fill, especially on the offensive line. But I think you can get by with those 2 linebackers as your starters. What says you?
I'm in lockstep. I was excited. Shaq Thompson, I know he's a bit older. I know he's, seen all the pitfalls of the previous regime or previous couple of years. But I'm really hoping he's back fully healthy. And I do think he is he's a tackling machine. You mentioned Jewell, who was with Evero previously. I think that is a big connection with a lot of the defensive guys that they brought in. While so many people left the door, like tremendously talented people, it seemed like that was a big effort that the GM was making with Evero and saying, hey, you got to at least interviews, with us and with other teams to get a chance to be a head coach. Can you stay here and be a defensive coordinator? But I'll get you some of your guys that have played in your systems and other places before. So hopefully that can kind of help ease the pain. And honestly, I think Evero may in fact be getting himself a head coaching position in the next year or two, depending on how he works with this team. So,
yeah. What says you about the offense? Anything jump out to you?
So the one position that it's the least sexy on this team when it comes to the weapons for fantasy. So the tight end position, it feels so long ago like we were watching Greg Olsen catch passes from Cam Newton, and we are a far cry from that, as we're seeing now. Tommy Tremble and Ian Thomas are leading that group. Ian Thomas, I still don't understand why they gave him an extension. I think it was 2 years ago. He hadn't done anything to deserve an extension. Maybe blocking, but even that hasn't been tremendous. But Tommy Tremble out of Notre Dame, he's a guy who, he is built like a linebacker. This guy is tremendously large and strong, but that's what he was known for at Notre Dame, was being a tenacious blocker and occasionally used as a receiver. But how the Panthers have used him thus far, very sparingly, a little bit as a receiver. They've actually used him a little bit also in the red zone, getting a couple of carries and scoring touchdowns that way. So he's someone who I really, really hope, and I've heard in a couple of interviews, they've mentioned his name a couple of times, talking glowingly about him. So I really hope that they're seeing kind of that, we always look for fantasy in that uber athletic tight end, and we hope that they can kind of refine the pass catching skills. And I think that Tremble, being a tremendous blocker, can keep him on the field, and hopefully they get him more opportunities with a lack of wide receivers around Bryce Young. They can get him some chances to kind of catch passes around the line of scrimmage, and certainly in the red zone, him continuing to be a weapon there.
Yeah, you know what, too? So with Tremble, he's been historically known as a great blocker when he was coming out of college. So the fact that he was getting all those reps, a lot of us were on him quickly and early. So I'm kind of glad you alluded back to that. I guess this last category we'll do is defensive back. I kind of want to stick here a little bit. Not a lot of names for the audience, but guys that play IDP. There's some guys that have had some stats. We'll start with J.C. Horn. He had a pre-injury, but before that, he was a statistic shutdown. I actually found a tweet. This goes back to June 1st, 2023, guys. J.C. Horn had a stretch. Amari Cooper, 3 targets. He shut him down with 1 reception. Olive, 2 targets, no receptions. Marquez Brown, 1 target, no receptions. Deebo Samuel, 2 targets, 0 receptions. DK Metcalf, 6 targets, only 3 receptions. Lockett, 2 targets, 1 reception. I had to go way back and look at that, and I'm going to actually tweet that to you there, Chu, because it's been a while since I heard anything about him. But I remember back in the day, he was really darn good, a low-key shutdown corner in cornerback leagues that were eligible. I'd play him. You haven't heard too much about him. This is going back, a couple seasons now?
Yep.
He only got 5 years in. Expect a rebound year. Again, a lot of these guys are on prove-it deals. I can name 5 or 6 of these guys. If everything works right, he'll be good. Again, so he's worth mentioning here. Troy Hill's another name. He held his own as a slot corner last season. He only conceded 6.3 yards per target coverage. That's good. That's good enough. Okay. He's getting a little older in age, so there's concerns with longevity. Plus, this position may need a little bit of an overhaul anyway. Another guy here is Dane Jackson. He's a decent player. You'll hear this a lot with this position. Had some ups and downs. Again, you'll hear this a lot with this position. Despite having the down year, Dane Jackson played with the Bills. He's over here at Carolina now. He's trying to make a name for himself as a starter. You hear that a lot about these positions with the Panthers. A lot of these guys on prove-it deals. But neither Hill or Jackson, they're not scary to me at all. But they're plug-in plays right now. They're stopgap. The team will need to get better with this unit. Going into the safeties, I feel a little bit more better. Jordan Fuller, you could say he's a journeyman, but he's a starter on this level. Like Jose Jewell that I said earlier, he's familiar with Evero and his system, playing with him before as well with the Rams. So should be a playable IDP in deeper leagues. Fuller you can get away with. Xavier Woods is a name that no one really talks about unless you're going back to previously when he used to play at the Vikings. But he's secretly a good player. You see the PFF ranking on him is green, right? He ranked 4th in pass coverage among safeties. Again, the problem with IDP is you don't get points for their coverage skills, right? You get points for what they do, okay? He's no Jeremy Chin, rookie season, mind you. He's no Jeremy Chin, but he's a very quality player in coverage. He provides – that's his game. His game has always been limiting yards per target in coverage, as it should be for a safety. But he's a favorite of mine, and, I pick him up sometimes in these later rounds. But the depth here is thin, and you can use better starters. There's one more guy worth mentioning, 5th-round pick Jamie Robinson. He's not really established himself yet, but there may be other options, but we don't really know what we have there. So we'll see. If I was to summarize this team, though, there's a lot of what-ifs, maybes, a lot of prove-it deals. I keep saying that. But it's clearly the roster of a rebuilding season. What says you, Chew?
Yeah, I think at this point, this is the unsexy answer of saying I hope we build a good culture this year, because I don't think the wins are going to be multiplying. Which even if they multiplied by 2, that'd be 4 wins, and that probably would still be less in the NFL. But I think that with a lot of the guys that they've brought in, again, I think they were very purposeful with who they brought in. If it was a veteran, was there a connection to the coach or the coordinator? If it's a younger guy, which I guess we'll see even more of that in the draft, who are they bringing in? Who are they prioritizing? Is it best player available? Because, again, even with bringing in some O-linemen and defensive linemen, that sort of thing, it doesn't mean you shouldn't draft another offensive defensive lineman. Draft talent. They need so much talent at this point. You're going to need to take a year or 2 of very good drafts, savvy cap work, and free agency to be able to build this team to really compete for winning this division, as these other teams around the Panthers are still also working to stay at top.
Is there anybody else in this team that we haven't covered? I feel like we did a good job here. Anybody else you want to give a shout out to?
Unfortunately, with this being my team and thinking that, I don't really want to talk about a Jonathan Mingo or any of those guys, there's a lack of top-tier talent at so many positions, but unfortunately there's also a lack of depth at so many positions as well, so even the fantasy-relevant ones. So I think it's really just looking at some of those starters, the Bryce Young, Chuba Hubbard, Deontay Johnson, at least on the offensive side, and hoping that all of them can continue to improve and, have their best seasons, which are possible, but for some of them, it's still not stellar.
Yeah, and well done with this NFC South breakdown. I think we nailed every nook and cranny, every stone unturned. For the audience at home, the audience on Spotify, if you guys want to get more in-depth details, we kind of went pretty in-depth here, but over at IDP Plus, they're running a sale right now. But if you want to ever see my work over there, and of course, I'm over here at the Six Pack as well. Sometimes I join Chew on Going for Two. We do pods as well. But that's where my work is. If anybody wants to check it out over at IDP Plus. Chew, it was so good having you on the show. Tell the audience how they can find you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I love talking about the worst division in football. You can follow me on Twitter and check me out on YouTube at Father Dynasty. On YouTube, I've got the Father Dynasty podcast. I've got the podcast episodes as well as some other kind of ancillary videos as well. Check out my writing over at goingfor2.com. And of course, I'm on the Fantasy Assessment, which is a show as well over at Going for Two Live on that network there. So check me out.
Yeah. I had fun with you. Hopefully you come back on. Maybe we can do some more shows. And Father Dynasty, that's an easy handle to remember. So guys, check him out. He's on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. Ask us questions. Looking forward to talking to you again, Chew. Good talking football today.
No question.
And hopefully the Panthers can outplay that division. We'll see.
Hey, we can dream.
All right. Y'all have a good night.